The problem that we are solving, I've noticed for a lot of our secure features, pretty much, I think all of them, whether it's any of our 4 scans that we have, SAS, DAS, dependency scanning, and container scanning, or license management, it requires that some level of configuration. That is, that you need to add a file to your project files or a little script to your main config file. That activates, then that triggers a pipeline, and then the feature will be activated if the pipeline succeeds, because the files were updated. We aren't doing a good job at the day 1 for the user. So for example, let's say that this is my day 1, and I want to go and blacklist some licenses or add licenses. I could come here to the UI and I could actually achieve that. I could add or approve one. The problem with this is if I didn't add the script to my config file, it never would have been set up. So we're kind of setting them down a not so good path. And so I have a license here where, well, I'm sorry, an issue here. It's not open. It's a little too last minute, but we have an issue open around that where we were working with engineers, and it's really not, it's something that's easily achievable for us to communicate that back to the user. So we can identify based on the last pipeline that was run, a small script that says, did they add this script to their config file? And if they didn't, then the proposed solution that I had in that issue was to say, here's where you need to go to set this up. So I took a look at some of the other features yesterday and just show you the day 1 experience. Here in the group dashboard, what we're looking at is, I got this from our QA because this is actually coming down the road. So just a side note, this is a little bit of a new layout change that we've been working on. But anyway, if you landed here, and this is a group dashboard, it's communicating to the user, hey, we found no vulnerabilities for your group, learn more about settings here. But again, just like license management, that is sending because there's no setup here. We haven't even configured our files to set up any, whether it's auto DevOps or SAS, DAS, or dependency scanning, container scanning. So once again, we're sending them down the wrong road. If you go to the project level, we're doing something similar. So I'm actually with Fabian today, and we were talking about how we could resolve this, and I was working with him on the same license management issue, which is easily achievable with us just seeing if their config file has the necessary script to do it, and the same level of ease applies here. So in this case, if they haven't set up any scanning or auto DevOps, we can just let them know, and we can leverage the documentation that we have to say, hey, nothing's been set up, so let's not show any UI. And here are the reports that you could have, and here's the links to the documentation to set it up. And in this case, if you set up auto DevOps, all the tests would be configured. Now, let's say that you just set up one of these tests. How then we can visualize this in the dashboard is just saying which tests are set up. And this has double importance. This is us communicating to the user that what files have and haven't been set up. So it's kind of giving them a nudge of, hey, you could set up dynamic testing, you could set up dependency scanning, just general awareness, and awareness for other users who maybe aren't the admin that are coming to the dashboard and saying, well, this data that I see in the table, where is it coming from anyway? And so this lets you know, oh, well, it's just coming from static application security testing. So then I thought just now, like, as I was working on this before the meeting, like, well, this is so common though in GitLab, like where you have to add a little script to a config file. How are we handling this elsewhere? You know, are we leveraging that in the UI? Are we leveraging the documentation? Are we guiding them? Are we giving them steps? Like another step here that I could even add is, what if there's not a pipeline set up? So maybe we could just, these are simple UI steps we could take with what I'm getting feedback from engineering, just simple scripts based on the last pipeline scan. So in this case, the script would be, has a pipeline even been set up for this project? If that's the case, then why don't we link them to the documentation to do that? So that's kind of what I'm hacking on this afternoon. I think my first question would be, have you seen this elsewhere, anywhere else in GitLab, and how they've handled these type of situations? And maybe I could leverage from that design or kind of get in line. We could align on the designs. So I think that's my first question. And if we don't know that, or is there any, do you think that this helps the user? Is there something that we could be more explicit about, considering this experience of the user just landing here? It could be an admin, it could be a developer. Are we being clear about what's going on here if nothing was set up?
For your first question, since it sounds like the folks on this call don't know, it might be worthwhile to reach out in the product channel, because the product managers would be, I think, more likely to know. And if that fails, you could reach out into the general questions channel, but I'd start with the product channel. And then I just had a quick question for you. Is it that this screen that you're on right now, and then the other screen that you were on just before this, are those mutually exclusive? Like you're going to do one or the other, or would both be patterns?
No, it's yeah, it's great question, and distinction that should be made is this is a day one experience. Nothing has been set up, not auto DevOps nor of any of these, but let's say one of them is set up. This is just communicating back where that status.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I like the logic of that. That makes a lot of sense to me. Some real quick feedback for you. If you go back to the previous screen.
Yep.
Now this is purely micro copy feedback for you. Something I'd consider is the last line there. If you set up DevOps, all tests will be enabled. It's actually probably more important than the links above it. And so I'd consider moving that up in the content hierarchy and maybe making it a little bit more visible. And then we do have a pattern for, look, I know these are lo-fi, so if you're already thinking on this path, sorry. But you know, our zero states, you might want an illustration or something for this when you're ready.
Yeah, I think I joined a little late, but I think I'm on the same page as you guys. I think this is a great opportunity to market, you know, to bring a little marketing into the product and put an illustration, get people excited about the feature, which will encourage them to adopt it and try it. So we want breadth of use, and so, you know, that graphic, to Christy's point, can pull people in and get them interested. And then I think the language that we might use, and maybe it's a pattern that we use in all cases, could be a bit more positive, like your testing data will appear here, and then let's get you set up, you know, and then here's the recovery action, the instructions, help content, or whatever we can do to get them started in a simple way. And thinking about that in terms of conversion, right? Like adoption conversion. But using personal language like you and positive language like this is going to be great once you do that. And I think that's a great, I don't know if we have that in our empty state patterns for pajamas yet? That might be the one thing that's missing there. The haven't used yet's empty state versus the you just don't have any data for this particular case.
Yeah, that's great feedback. I agree. It could be more peppy and aspirational in the copy. So brass tacks now, just to kind of get the idea across. But I especially like auto DevOps because that's what we'd want to encourage, right? Because that's the out of the box experience. I think my bias is probably because I did this based on some early feedback we got on some user testing we're doing now, and it's about setting up SAST only. So that's probably where my bias is on that. So it's good to kind of call that out.
Yeah, it seems like on the other screen, enabled auto DevOps could even be like a primary CTA. And then the others are just supporting. If you don't want to do this primary CTA, then hey, here's information about some other stuff too.
Yeah, and so I did a quick flyby design review with Fabian, like I mentioned, and my question there was could we, like technically speaking, kind of instead of just sending them the documentation, could we add that script to the config file? And the answer is yes. Actually, that's not that big of a problem. And so then the next thought is, oh, well, if you add it, then we would maybe need an off switch, but maybe as an MVC, I think the next steps that I'm thinking through is that we could have some like quick add. You add the script to the config file, and then maybe there's some sort of communication back to the user that if you want to remove this, you would need to manually remove it from the X, Y, and Z file. And that's only because we still have some issues and work to do on getting our settings together. But anyway, that's. Do you have any thoughts on that, of that being an MVC, if we could get that ability? Because that just makes it so much easier, and that gets us closer to the out of the box experience. And again, the insights that we're getting from just setting up SAST alone have not. The users are really struggling on what to do, where to go.
Yeah,
so,
I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
And I think you're right for MVC. If you can enable it, but you have to do something else to disable it. It's not ideal, but it's also not terrible. The one thing I would say back to that previous screen is that something that's not clear to me right now with the way the links are is that I'm going to go to documentation. And then I think something to consider is even if you add the capability to enable things here, I do want to be able to get to the documentation though, because maybe I don't know if I want to enable it or not. And then maybe we default back to a more standard pattern around, an info icon or something that indicates like, hey, we're just like, here's where you go for more information if you aren't ready to just pull the trigger yet.
Mm-hmm.
Are those sequential steps there, those links? Is that what they are? Or are they?
Not necessarily. No, those are just the security scans that we have available.
I wonder if we could make it more instructional, like step 1, step 2.
It sounds like it's not steps though, right? It's just kind of you could do this or you could do that or.
Yeah, I think, and if it's not steps, then maybe using written, like language to communicate that, like here's what these things are. I think that's kind of, instead of blind links into, I don't know where I'm gonna go, or if these things are relevant to me, like here's your recovery actions, right? You might consider doing this or this or this, depending on that. And if we can set time expectations that are reliable, that might be good too. Like it only takes, minutes to set this, to do this thing. obviously they have to be reliable estimates or we're going to lose credibility, but I think that helps too in terms of conversion. Like you can get this set up in seconds or minutes, or this is a quick scan that will help you get where you're trying to go.
Yeah, and so there's a few things to that. If they haven't set up a pipeline, that in that situation, that would be a step. Step one, set up your config file. Step two, here are reports that you could then set up. And then step three, or maybe just a note, is actually like once you set these up, it will trigger a pipeline, and then you'll be able to see the data on future merge requests. So I like the idea of kind of showing, like incentivizing them, like why should I do this, you know, or just getting those, that's just one sentence. It's simple context of what will happen as a result of going in this direction. It's a good clarification.
Yeah, I really like that take on it. And as a reminder, we do have a marketing content team. So if you want to partner with someone just to help you to just really just rate the content, they're available. And then if they're not, for whatever reason, we also have our technical writers. But I would start with the marketing team, because to Shane's point, this is verging on that side of stuff.
Are there any names that come to mind on that, on the marketing team?
I would start with Shane Rice. If he's not the right person, he can tell you who is.
Okay.
Oh, you know, and there's a product marketing manager for Secure specifically.
Yeah, that's Cindy Blake.
Oh, Cindy Blake, right. Okay, that would be the right one. Okay, awesome. Well, any other thoughts come to mind?
This is great. I'm so glad you shared it. And I'm glad you shared it when you shared it. This was perfect timing. And the logic around how you're thinking about it, I think is really sound. So it's great that you're now starting to think about the details of how you're going to do it.
Well, thanks. And I'm sorry I was so last minute. I was
totally
I jumped in the room and it's like, well, I'll show you what I'm working.
No, I'm so glad you took the opportunity. And as always, I learned something from this. So thank you for that.
And I was just going to ask Kyle if you had looked on, are you familiar with the site useronboard.com? They have, well, so if you just Google like empty states UX, you can find a lot of inspirational, like kind of just ideas. But useronboard.com is one site that just focuses on like different ways of onboarding users. And they have, I was just looking at it because I haven't looked at it in a long time, and they have so many use cases. There's dozens of, they call them teardowns, where they go through a user onboarding process for a company or web application and talk about like the different aspects of it. So I would just say that for ideas, those might be some really good resources.
Cool.
I did link to in the chat to Pajama's empty states, so that you could see if any of this is covered there, and if not, maybe contribute, because this is what you're solving for here is an app-wide opportunity, and one that I don't know how well we are not capitalizing on. But with a unified platform, it's definitely to our advantage to get people to use as many features as possible. Anything we can do to sort of help them along is really valuable. And if we can create a simple template with some best practices, you know, then I think that would be really powerful. Something the team could leverage in many, many areas.
A great point.
We did this is, yeah, and I will I have that noted as well. It would be nice to have something go to, because it doesn't seem like there is now, but there was this one project that I just worked on, this milestone, where we came across this as well, and we used much more kind of peppy language here. So this was identifying out-of-date projects. And we're like, your projects are out of date, up to date, nice job. So I think it could be an area where we kind of align on and have more fun or human sort of copy, right?
For what it's worth, I used almost that exact same language on the empty state for to-dos.
Oh,
So seems like we have some sort of a pattern or trend emerging.
yeah. Cool. All right, well, I have some really great notes here, and I'll add them to the document, the group document. I'm open an issue, so I'll link that there too. And if you think of any thoughts, just we can keep the conversation going in the issue.
This is great. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.